Moreover, it was too antipathetic to the Hindu genius to have exerted any influence on the national art, even during the period during which it was imposed by force. No traces of Greek influence are found in the contemporary or posterior Hindu monuments, in the subterranean temples, for example. On the other hand, they would be far too easily discerned for it to be possible to pass them over. Apart from the general aspect which is always characteristic, there are technical details, the treatment of the draperies in particular, which at once reveal the hand of a Greek artist. The disappearance of Greek art in India was as sudden as its apparition, and this very suddenness shows how entirely it was an imported art, officially imposed but without affinity with the people that had been obliged to accept it. Arts never disappear in this way from amongst a people. They transform themselves, and the new art always borrows something from that of which it has taken the place. After suddenly appearing in India, Greek art as suddenly disappeared without exerting any influence whatever, exactly as has been the case with the European monuments erected in the country by the English during the past 2 centuries. The fact that at the present day the European arts exert no influence in India may be compared with the exceeding slightness of the influence of the Greek arts there 18 centuries ago. It cannot be denied that we have here a case of incompatibility of aesthetic sentiments, for the Mussulman arts, although quite as foreign to India as the European arts, have been imitated throughout the peninsula. Even in those parts of the country where the Mussulmans have never exercised any power, it is rare to come across a temple that does not contain some traces of Arabian ornamentation. Doubtless, as in the distant times of King Kanishka, we see Rajas at the present day, such as the Raja of Gwalior, attracted by the might of the foreigners, build themselves European palaces in the Greco-Latin style. But again, as in the time of Kanishka, this official art, superposed on the indigenous art, is totally without influence on the latter. Greek and Hindu art then formerly existed side by side, like European art and Hindu art at the present day, but without ever influencing one another. So far as the monuments of India, properly so called, are concerned, there is not one of them of which it can be said that it offers either in its general aspect or in its details any resemblance whatever, however remote, with a Greek monument. This powerlessness of Grecian art to implant itself in India is striking, and it must needs be attributed to the incompatibility we have pointed out between the soul of the two races, and not to a sort of incapacity native to India to assimilate a foreign art, for the country has shown itself perfectly able to assimilate and transform the arts that correspond to its mental constitution. The archaeological documents that we have been able to collect show that Persia was the source from which India derived its arts, not the slightly Hellenized Persia of the time of the Arsacides, but the Persia that had inherited the old civilizations of Egypt and Assyria. It is known that when Alexander overthrew the dynasty of the Achaemenides 330 BC, the Persians had already been in possession for 2 centuries of a brilliant civilization. Doubtless they had not discovered the formula of a new art, but the mixture of the arts of Egypt and Assyria, which they had inherited, had produced remarkable works. We can judge them by the still existing ruins of Persepolis, which show us by their Egyptian pylons, their Assyrian winged bulls, and even some Grecian elements, that all the arts of the great anterior civilizations had mingled their influences in this limited region of Asia. India then borrowed its arts from Persia, but it borrowed them in reality from the sources to which Persia itself had gone, from Chaldea and Egypt. The study of the monuments of India reveals the borrowings on which they lived originally, but to establish these borrowings the most ancient monuments must be examined, for the Hindu genius is so specific that the borrowed elements, in order to adapt themselves to it, undergo such transformations that they soon become unrecognizable. Why is it that India, which has shown itself so incapable of borrowing anything whatever from Greece, has shown itself, on the contrary, so disposed to borrow from Persia? The reason evidently is that the Persian arts correspond to its mental structure, whereas there was no such correspondence in the case of the arts of Greece. The simple forms and the sparely ornamented surfaces of the Grecian monuments could not appeal to the Hindu genius, which was attracted, on the contrary, by the complicated forms, the exuberant decoration, and the wealth of ornament of the Persian monuments. Moreover, it is not solely at this distant epoch, anterior to our era, that Persia, representing Egypt and Assyria, exerted an influence on India by its arts. When many centuries later the Mussulmans appeared in the peninsula, their civilization during its passage through Persia had been deeply imbued with Persian elements, and it brought to India in reality a Persian art still bearing traces of those old Assyrian traditions which had been continued by the dynasty of Achaemenids. The gigantic doorways of the mosques, and especially the enameled bricks with which the mosques are lined externally, are vestiges of the Chaldeo-Assyrian civilization. India was able to assimilate these arts so well because they were in accordance with the genius of its race, whereas Greek art in the past and European art at the present day, being utterly opposed to its mode of thinking and feeling, have always remained without influence on the national productions. It is not, then, with Greece, as the archaeologists still maintain, but with Egypt and Assyria, through the medium of Persia, that India is linked. India has borrowed nothing from Greece, but both have gone to the same sources, to that common treasure, the foundation of all civilizations brought into being in the course of centuries by the peoples of Egypt and Chaldea. The borrowings of Greece were effected through the medium of the Phoenicians, and of the peoples of Asia Minor, those of India through the medium of Persia. The civilizations of Greece and India hark back in this way to a common source, but the currents that issued from this source in the two countries speedily took very different directions, in harmony with the genius of either race. If, however, as we have asserted, the art of a race is in close correspondence with its mental constitution, and if for this reason the same art, borrowed by dissimilar races, at once assumes very different forms, we should expect to find that India, a country inhabited by a great variety of races, is in possession of very different arts and of styles of architecture that bear no resemblance to one another, in spite of the identity of beliefs. An examination of the monuments of the different regions of India shows how entirely this is the case. Indeed, the differences between the monuments are so profound that the only classification of the monuments we have been able to make is based on regions, that is, on racial distinctions, and is quite independent of the religion to which the peoples who have constructed them have belonged. There is no analogy between the monuments of the north of India and those of the south, constructed though they were at the same period by peoples professing a similar religion. Even during the Mussulman domination at a period, that is, when the political unity of India was most complete and the influence of the central authority at its maximum, the purely Mussulman monuments present profound differences according to the region in which they are found. The mosques of Ahmedabad, Lahore, Agra, and Bijapur, although devoted to the same cult, offer but a very slight relationship, a much slighter relationship than that which connects a monument of the Renaissance with those of the Gothic period. It is not architecture only that varies in India according to the race. The statuary also varies with the different regions, not merely as regards the types represented, but especially in respect to the way in which they are treated. If the bas-reliefs or the statues of Sanchai be compared with those of Bharat, with which they are nevertheless contemporary, the difference is already manifest. It is plainer still when the statues and bas-reliefs of the province of Orissa are compared with those of Bundelkhand, or again the statues of Mysore with those of the great pagodas of the south of India. The influence of race is everywhere apparent. It is seen, moreover, in the most trifling artistic productions, which, as everybody is aware, differ immensely in India from one region to another. It is not necessary to be very expert to distinguish between a coffer in carved wood of Mysore workmanship and a coffer that hails from the Gujarat district, or between a jewel from the province of Orissa and a jewel from that of Bombay. Doubtless the architecture of India, like all Oriental architecture, is principally religious, but however great religious influence may be, especially in the East, the influence of race is much more considerable. The soul of the race which guides the destinies of peoples determines as well their beliefs, institutions, and arts. Whatever be the element of civilization under consideration, its action is always perceptible. It is the only force against which no other force can prevail. It represents the dead weight of thousands of generations, the synthesis of their thought. End of section 8.